Hey guys, what's good? It's the Tominator. So this video is dedicated to the real uncrowned Mr. Olympias, those few men throughout history who were genuinely robbed of the Mr. Olympia title. And the key word here is few, because true robberies, even at the Olympia level where politics become involved, are not as common as you might believe. I mean, sure, there's been plenty of controversial outcomes over the years, times where there's certainly an argument to be made for the second place guy. But if you step back and actually analyze it objectively, you can see why the champion prevailed, even if you don't agree with it. I feel like in bodybuilding circles, then, the term uncrowned Mr. Olympia is heavily overused and thrown around way too casually, when in reality, this designation should be reserved solely for those individuals who deserved to win the Sandow beyond a shadow of a doubt and were screwed out of near certain victory. What's interesting then is that we're not just talking about the best bodybuilders to never win an Olympia. This is an important distinction here because the true uncrowned Mr. Olympias are not necessarily the best bodybuilders to never win it. I'm going to do a whole separate video on that, but just for example's sake, let's look at Kevin Levrone. Now here is a guy who many people immediately point to as an uncrowned Mr. Olympia, and understandably so. He was runner-up 4 times, which is more than anyone else aside from Jay Cutler. First in 1992 and 95 behind Dorian Yates, and then again in 2000 and 2002 behind Ronnie Coleman. And let me just say right off the bat that he's one of my personal top 3 favorite bodybuilders of all time as well, so this isn't me just being biased or having some kind of agenda against Levrone. Because we all know the dude had some of the sickest triceps and shoulders of all time, and was lights out in certain poses like the side chest and most muscular. He was massive but still highly aesthetic, and with great stage presence to boot. So how could he not be considered an uncrowned Mr. Olympia? Surely he deserved to win at least one of those years, right? Well, actually, no. In 92, this was his rookie season, and he was still raw and unfinished. His conditioning was ultra sharp, probably the best it had ever been, but his back development was nowhere near the level it needed to be, and he could have used an extra 10 or 20 pounds of muscle in the upper body alone. I've reviewed this contest in depth in a past video, and I think Levrone was lucky to place second ahead of more complete veterans like Lee Labrada and Sean Ray. By 1995, Kevin's physique had matured. He'd made improvements all around, adding quality mass to his back and arms, but unfortunately, Dorian Yates showed up this year looking out of his mind. Dorian himself claims that 1995 was probably his best shape ever, and it was only a toss-up between this and 1993 because of the torn bicep he'd suffered in the interim. That threw off his symmetry. But the gains through his lats and the added thickness and muscle maturity clearly made this one of his most formidable versions ever. So it was something of a lost cause for Kevin because Dorian at his best was virtually unbeatable. Fast forward to the year 2000, and some people say that he should have beaten Ronnie here. In my opinion, this is absolutely laughable. Ronnie had some bloating issues to be sure, but this was well before the bubble gut epidemic had gotten to the point where it is now, so fans and judges alike were more willing to turn a blind eye to it back then. And other than the midsection, Ronnie was bigger and better in pretty much every conceivable way. Levrone's legs were also down compared to previous years, and contrary to what you might hear sometimes, he was not at his best here. Likewise in 02, and once again, Kevin was lucky just to take second. If anything, Gunther Schlierkamp should have been the one challenging for the title, as he was more massive and in better condition than Levrone. So yes, it almost pains me to say it, guys, but when you look back and really examine his track record, Kevin Levrone never deserved to win the Olympia, and so cannot be labeled an uncrowned Mr. Olympia, despite the fact that he is objectively a better and more accomplished bodybuilder than the 3 or 4 men who were. So let's jump into that right now, and then we'll circle back to a couple more examples who fell short like Levrone. Alright, so first among the real uncrowned Mr. Olympias is Nasser El Sambati. In my opinion, this was probably the most obvious example of an athlete getting utterly screwed over by politics. Because while I was just saying that Dorian Yates at his best was pretty much unbeatable, in 1997 we saw Dorian at his worst, and he was very beatable and should have been defeated that year, probably by more people than just Nasser for that matter. His body was so destroyed by injuries at this point that he looked like half-melted crap, and it's simply unconscionable that the IFBB decided to award him his 6th Sandow trophy. Sean Ray said it best.
And in 97, Dorian tore his tricep to go along with his bicep. and he came in considerably heavier as a result of the injuries that were taking its toll on his physique. And he managed to win the Olympia in '97 with literally perfect scores. And I thought, this is unfathomable. How can this guy win the contest? He can come in a wheelchair and win the show.
The second man who I consider to be an undisputed, uncrowned Mr. O is Victor Martinez. 2007 should have been Victor's year. It was his best shape ever, and he was far more conditioned than the eventual champion, an off Jay Cutler. The only advantage Jay had over him was some extra mass and better legs from the front, but from the side and rear, Jay's lower body lacked any sort of cuts, and upstairs, Victor also had far better shape and detail. Again, I've already reviewed this contest at length and came to the conclusion that Victor was soundly robbed. But don't just take my word for it, ask Ronnie or Flex.
Flex, it's over. Jay repeats. I know you got a very strong opinion. I've seen you interview everyone around here. Not one person said Jay Cutler should have won. What do you feel?
No, I mean, first and foremost, like Steve, I want to congratulate Jay, and he is a great champion. He's a great man. But I'm not talking about him as a person. My situation, I'm a critic, and I have to talk about him as far as the physique. So I agree with most of the people. For him to even have been in the running for a possibility of the title was basically the judges acknowledging and saying that his condition yesterday was applicable to be a champion, for him to be either 2 points away or whatever it was. So, I mean, I guess I'm just stupid, blind, ignorant, and dumb. Because I don't agree with that by no means whatsoever.
Flex, after the prejudging, Jay Cutler was winning by 2 points, they said, and I talked to Jim Raquel, and he said that Victor Martinez won the posing round. That means that Jay Cutler won the Mr. Olympia contest in the pose down. What do you think about that?
I think that's bullshit, man.
Lastly, we have Tom Platz in 1981. Or Danny Padilla, take your pick. If you prefer more mass and better wheels, then it's Platz all day. But if you favor shape and proportions, it's Danny, no doubt. Either choice would have been perfectly acceptable over an out-of-shape, gyno-plagued Franco Colombo who had practically zero definition from the waist down. Franco was surely gifted this victory just off reputation alone. That and his connection to Arnold, his longtime friend and training partner, who just so happened to be promoting the event that year. Nope, nothing suspicious at all there. But in all seriousness, this was probably the most ridiculous result in Olympia history, well, along with 1997. Other than these three occasions, however, I can't think of any other contests that quite compare. Now, admittedly, I'm not too familiar with some of the older Olympias in the late 70s and mid to late 80s, so I need to go back and kind of brush up on those and review them in greater detail. But let's talk about some other great bodybuilders who fell just short. Perhaps none were better than the Sultan of Symmetry, Flex Wheeler. Unfortunately for Flex, he seemed to have the worst timing when it came to peaking, as in all the years he took second, he was going up against some of the very best versions of two of the most dominant Mr. Olympias ever. 1993 was probably Dorian's best package ever, so even though Flex was infinitely more aesthetic and had terrific definition, Yates was even more conditioned and outmassed Wheeler. So while I personally would have preferred to see Flex win, you can hardly say that Yates was undeserving. Same goes for 98 and 99 against Ronnie. Big Ron was simply too huge and ripped for the more slender and softer Wheeler to handle, so there's absolutely no way in hell Flex beats him during those years. And what about Kai Green, you might ask? Didn't he get robbed in 2014? Hate to break it to you fellas, but Kai didn't outright beat Phil that year. It was extremely close, and you can certainly make an argument for Kai because he did win his share of poses, but it was still more of a controversy rather than a full-fledged robbery. Go check out my full review for a more detailed explanation, but if you just want the quick and dirty, Phil was still more complete and just as conditioned, if not more conditioned, than Kai, despite his noticeable distension issues. Plus, Kai Green had some stomach distension of his own going on, so Sean versus Dorian in 1994 is another debatable verdict. In my opinion, Sean Ray should have won for his greater polish and having less flaws, but it was close in any case, and it would be disingenuous to claim he was robbed. Like I mentioned earlier, Gunter posed a serious challenge in 2002. This was probably Ronnie's weakest outing, as he was uncharacteristically small and vulnerable that year, and Gunter was conversely at the top of his game. So this one is definitely up for debate, but again, I would hesitate to call it a robbery given Ronnie's superiority from the back. Mike Mentzer back in 1980 had an argument to the crown, I suppose, even though he was only finished 5th. But after checking out all the photos of that contest, I honestly don't agree that he should have won. If we're judging primarily on the basis of conditioning, then sure, Arnold didn't even deserve top 5 by that metric. But if we're looking at the totality of the physique in terms of mass and shape and proportion and posing and everything else, then it's hard to deny the Austrian oak, who thoroughly outmassed, and one might even argue outclassed the rest of the field. Bertil Fox in '83 is another guy who people sometimes claim was uncrowned, and it's like, dude, did you even see Samir Banu that year? His back was insane, way ahead of his time. He was in great condition too, so I can't fathom how anybody could say with a straight face that Bertil got robbed that year. Sure, maybe he should have placed a couple spots higher, but no way does he beat Samir. And lastly, there are those who say Lee Labrada should have dethroned Lee Haney in 1990. And I'm mostly undecided on this one, primarily because pictures are so scarce. You can barely find any direct mandatory comparisons between the two that year, but based on the couple I was able to uncover, I see no problem at all with Haney's victory. Even if he wasn't in his best shape, he was still so overpowering in terms of size and thickness, I can't really see how the much smaller 180-pound Lee Labrada could have beaten him. So that's all for this one, guys. That is pretty much how I would separate out all the controversies from the real robberies. And while there were a couple other contentious outcomes that I neglected to mention, like Sergio versus Arnold in '72, or Jay Cutler in 2001, remember that Sergio and Jay both won Olympia titles, so by definition, they cannot be labeled uncrowned Mr. Olympias, right? And just to reiterate, there are only 3 or 4 men in history who I would consider as true uncrowned Mr. Olympias: Victor Martinez, Nasser El Somebody, and Tom Platz or Danny Padilla. That's about it. And in case you're pissed off or feeling shafted because your favorite bodybuilder didn't make it, not to worry, guys, I will be making a follow-up vid where we'll count down the very best bodybuilders to never win the Olympia. Probably in a top 10 format or something like that, because countdowns are always fun. But until then, thank you all for watching and stay tuned for more. I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.